Hey guys, my name is Haley, and it's been a minute, and I will be the first person to say it's wholeheartedly because of what happened in the US in the last 2 weeks. If you're unaware of that, or what is going on, or what is coming, please do your research, especially if you are someone who voted for the current predicament a lot of us are in. But I realized I had been planning on filming my October wrap up the day after the election. And that didn't happen because I had no motivation to do anything. And it took me a solid week and a half to deal with the grief of all of that. And then I reached like a feminine rage portion of it. And now I've been making a shit ton of bracelets and gifts for the cast of VHS Christmas Carols, which is Star Kids show in Chicago that I'm going to see this weekend. And I figured I could multitask. Otherwise, I'm never going to film my October wrap up. And I don't want to do that, like just put it off forever, because there were a lot of books in the month that I did really enjoy. I also read 21 books, so that's a big chunk of books to never talk about on here. So I figured I would do some multitasking. You're probably going to hear me sifting through beads and stuff throughout this. My hair might hit the mic. This is just me trying to get something out before I waste away and forget that YouTube exists. So I'm just going to talk about all of the books that I read in October. I'll be real, some of them I'm probably not going to say a whole lot about because it feels like I read them 700 years ago, besides the ones that were my favorites. So there is that. But yeah, I'm going to multitask. So if you see me not looking at the camera, that's why I am making a shit ton of bracelets for the cast of Christmas Carols. The first book that I read in the month of October was Lost Gods by Brom. And my biggest takeaway from this was that it was very interesting for the first, I want to say 25-30% of it. And then it lost me because there was so much plot going on that I couldn't even keep track of everything that was happening. And as someone who has read quite a bit of fantasy, that's saying something, at least in my opinion. But this was just, it was so convoluted. But there were also parts of it that I really, really, really enjoyed. Like I loved the basic premise of this is this kid, I think he's like 18, dies at the very beginning, and he has a girlfriend who is about to have a baby, and he just kidnapped, not kidnapped because she wanted to go with him, but her parents wouldn't let her leave because she wasn't quite 18 yet, and they were having a child. So they take off and they go to his grandmother's house to hide away for a while. He hasn't talked to his grandmother in years, but he knows that she'll help them. And then he dies in the beginning, and there's these demon creatures and everything involved in it. And that is the least interesting part of the story, in my opinion. Because what happens is eventually this kid goes to the underworld, and the way this underworld works, which was by far the most interesting part to me, is that based on whatever religion you believed in your life on earth, that is what your afterlife looks like. So, for example, if you were someone that believed that hell, like the Christian hell, existed, then you were going to hell. If you believed in Greek mythology, you would go to the river Styx and Hades and stuff like that. So it was based on your personal belief as opposed to everybody goes somewhere specific. There were also a lot of Christian themes in this, of Mary being one of the harbingers of what is essentially purgatory, because it's the land before you get to actual hell or Hades or wherever you go. And there were a lot of conversations about religion in particular that I found fascinating, which is the only reason this book, I gave it a 3.5 star. But the storyline, and there was a competition of games and stuff in the middle that I thought was super unnecessary, and that's where it lost me because it was about the 50% mark. And I also just didn't care about our main character because we don't know really much about him before he dies and goes to hell. So I couldn't figure out why we were supposed to care if he came back to his family. It was also just a very big like story of good and evil. It's just I can't tell if I like Brahms books or not because I love Slewfoot. But also when I read The Child Thief, the Peter Pan one years ago, I felt pretty similar. I think I gave it like a 3 stars. I didn't think I really liked it. I don't know if I would like it more now because I wasn't reading a lot of books like that back then. But I also don't think necessarily that I 100% would like it more now because I think there's something about Brahms books that just doesn't click in my brain. His pictures and like his illustrations and everything are obviously beautiful, but his storylines sometimes get a little too convoluted. I felt like there was too much that he wanted to do in this book, and it just didn't come across the way he wanted to. I feel like if he wanted to do all of these things, this should have been a series, but I don't think he really does series. I don't know. This was a weird book. It feels like I read it a million years ago because I read it like at the end of September into October. I don't know. It was a weird one. So I gave that 3.5 stars. And that was the first book that I read in the month of October. Next up is a book I don't remember like practically anything about because I listened to it in like one go. And it was like a 6-hour audiobook, so I just like listened to it on 3 times speed, and like most of it went over my head because I didn't find it that interesting, and that is Whisper Down the Lane. And I listened to this on audio. I apparently gave it 3 stars. It's definitely more of a 2 star because I could not tell you anything about this book at this point. I think the reason I picked it up is because it was set during the satanic panic of like the 80s and 90s when Christians were like obsessed with everything being of the devil, even more so than they still are now. But this was about some kids, and it was literally how rumors can get so incredibly out of control if people can control the narrative. So it was about these kids who had a teacher that they really liked, and then somebody coerced one of their children into asking very leading, like extremely leading questions that should not have held up in a court of law, but for some reason they did at that time because people didn't have any safeguards against this. Where they were convinced, this parent was convinced that this, I think he's an art teacher, was sexually assaulting kids. And he was not. And it was like proven throughout the story that he wasn't. But they just really didn't like this guy. And I couldn't remember if it was because they thought he was queer or what it was. But it was literally, they had convinced the entire school system, the entire board of education, like everybody involved in this, that this had happened. And it was completely a story that was made up by one super paranoid parent, and how that kind of destroyed this teacher's life and destroyed the trust of the town and everyone involved. It was actually really wild because for me, I'm sitting here going, oh, I'm leaning for beads. You can get a really close up of my face. For me, it was just one of those, why would anyone believe this? Or like, why would you assume that this was true if there is zero proof about it? But also the story just kept getting more and more outrageous that I was like, somebody has to believe that this is like fake. There's got to be somebody being like, oh, wait, whoa, you guys might be overreacting a little bit. There was no one. No one said anything to disprove it. They were just convinced, and everybody ran with the rampant misinformation and coercion of a small child who didn't understand what they were doing or what they were saying. And as a teacher, this infuriated me. Like, does that happen in schools? Absolutely. Did the way this happened need to blow up into what it turned into? Absolutely not. It was ridiculous. It was just some insane parents who needed some mental help, in my opinion. And I it was infuriating to listen to. And I don't even know how I ended up finishing it because I wanted to DNF it at one point. And the only reason I did was because I think I was also making bracelets at the time and just listened to the old audiobook. But I did not like this book. I gave it 2 stars. It didn't have enough to do with the satanic panic in a way that I liked to be worth the read. Next up, I read some of these I own. I actually own like half of them on like physically, and I'm just not going to get them. So you get all the pictures that I'm throwing up because I can't even go pull them off my shelves. I put them away as soon as October was over, and it's too late now for me to go get them. But the next one I read was Night in the Lows of October by Richard Lehman. I shockingly really enjoyed this. This was a random book that I absolutely bought on a cover buy. And if I can't find the cover on Goodreads, I'll be annoyed because I 100% bought this solely for the cover. And it is about this boy who, I don't think he's boy. He's like, it's like new adult age. This was written in like 2003, so new adult wasn't really a thing yet. And it is about this guy who like wanders the streets in the middle of the night multiple times. Like the first time he goes out, and it's like his paranoia of like, oh, what if there was some scary thing in the dark? And there's a lot of instances of he sees like this person on a bike who looks like a witch, and that this is a character he keeps running into, and it's very unclear if this is a real person and he just sees them as a witch because of his paranoia, or if it's actually something paranormal. I will also say this is written from a man's perspective and was written by a man, so there are some descriptions of like the sexual nature that I normally would have been like ew and grossed out by, but it somehow fit the tone of the story well enough that I like let it slide. I'm not gonna lie, if I was reading it now in the current climate of the United States, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. So I don't know if I necessarily recommend this, if that is at all triggering to you, of like the male gaze and like the way that men automatically sexualize women and such. Don't know that I would recommend that now or ever again, but I overall really, really enjoyed the atmosphere of this when I did read it. So I gave it 4 stars. I don't know that I would ever pick up anything else by this author. To be fair, I have not looked him up and seen what else he wrote. But this is definitely a horror, but more in it's you're very much inside this main character's head the entire time. So if you don't like our main character, and I don't think I necessarily liked him, you might find it slightly infuriating. So again, this is a weird one because I don't know if I would recommend it, but at the time I read it, I enjoyed it for what it was. And then next up, I think a couple of these were in my last vlog, so I'll link that vlog down below if I have the brain cells to remember to do that. But the next book I read was Burn Down, Rise Up by Vincent Torrado. If you remember, I read, what's it called? We Came to Welcome You by Vincent Torrado back in September, and it's going to be on my favorite books of the year list. And this is one of her YA books, and I have learned that I'm glad that she is venturing into adult, because some YA things I just cannot like mentally get on board with, and this was the case with this one. I thought the premise was really interesting, but the execution and it being YA and not being able to go further with the horror really left the story lacking, in my opinion. But I did give this like 3.75 4 stars, somewhere in there. I did really like our main character quite a bit, and honestly, that's all I have to say about it. I do like Vincent Torrado a lot, and I like following them on social media. And I'm very excited to see what they come out with next, because I do like their writing style. I just don't think that a lot of YA is for me. I also think this is one of their first books ever published. So that makes a difference in their writing style and how much it's improved with We Came to Welcome You, because that just came out this year. But yeah, if you read a lot of YA or you're of the YA age range, definitely try it out. And I did like the like dreamlike essence of this, is that there's another world of this like tragedy that happened in the past, and they can like travel back in time by playing this game. I liked that concept, but the execution was not my favorite. So I gave this 3.75 stars. And then I read A House in Poplar Wood. This is about these two brothers. It's a middle grade. It's about these two brothers who are separated at, I think it was at birth, due to a deal that their parents made with death and memory, which are like gods in this world. And it's them trying to figure out how to end this curse and like get their family back together. I thought it was really cute. I really liked the female character in this that like helps them solve the mystery. I thought she was really fun in particular. She's a very like, for lack of a better comparison, Hermione-esque character, and I liked it. It was 4 stars. I don't really read a whole lot of middle grade anymore, and I don't think that I will start doing a lot of that unless it's like a book I actually recommend to a child in that age range. I do work with children in that age range from time to time, so I'm sure I will occasionally read it. And would I recommend this to a middle schooler? Absolutely. If they wanted to get like into a little fairy tale like fantasy-esque story, I would recommend it to that age range. But that's my opinion on that one. And then next up, I read Tomi, which is by Junji Ito. I've read quite a bit of Junji Ito's stories. He's a horror manga author, if you don't know. And this is one about a girl who is like, I don't know if she's like been cursed or what, but she can't die. And every time somebody tries to kill her or like attacks her, she like multiplies and there becomes like tons of her. And it's her haunting this town in Japan and like terrorizing men because she hates them. So it was fun. Again, gave it 3.75 stars. That's my average rating for Junji Ito. I never like adore his books, but if you want like gruesome horror in manga format, he's the go-to. God, I've only gone through like 6 books. And I feel like I've been talking for forever. This is gonna take a while. We have 21 books to go through. I'm just gonna blast through these next couple. I read The Graveyard Book, which I honestly am not going to talk about this author anymore. And I've read a few of his books at this point, and I'm no longer going to be picking up any of his books because he apparently is under strict investigation for SA. So I promptly got rid of the book the second that happened and will not be speaking about his books again. So it's not a big deal to me. I know a lot of people loved him. I was not one of those people. I've been like pretty mediocre with some of his books that I've read, so it was just a see you later to all of his books that were on my TBR and that I already owned. So that's that on that. And then I read Snapdragon, which was the cutest graphic novel. I really liked this. It is about this little kid who who is a person who is supposedly a witch in the town, and like there's this whole horror story assigned with this witch and about how evil they are and everything. And they come across them, realizes they're not evil, and then starts hanging out with them and at their house after school. And it's like a whole little cutesy, adorable queer happiness story. And it's a graphic novel, and I really enjoyed it. I love the art style. I would 100% read something else by this author. I also believe this is the same author. Is it this one or my other graphic novel? I think it's this one that wrote Lumberjanes, which is a series I've always wanted to read, but I'm just slow at reading graphic novels. So I really like this. I gave it 5 stars. It was so cute. Then I read, what was it called? Over My Dead Body by Sweeney Boo. This was also a graphic novel, and it was set at a like female boarding school. It was set at a boarding school, and it was about witches, and it was about the story about 2 kids who went missing years ago and how the boarding school covered it up, and these people end up trying to figure out what happened to them because one of their friends goes missing in the present day. And I really enjoyed this. I loved the art style, and the storyline kept me intrigued. It even surprised me, which is shocking for graphic novels. That's not normally the case. When I do read them, I'm not like blown away by them, but I really, really enjoyed this, and I gave it 5 stars. Would absolutely read something else by that author. Next up, we have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Is that who it's by? Yes. And this really, the best word to describe this story is eerie. It's about this woman, this sapphic couple. Her wife goes off on what is supposed to be a routine submarine trip for her job, which is supposed to be a week long. And it ends up turning into, I think, like 6 months, if not longer, is how long she ends up under there. And there is no explanation whatsoever from the company of why this happened. And they are absolutely trying to cover it up, and then all of a sudden they are resurfaced back up. Only 2 of I think there were 5 of them, 5 or 6 of them. Only 2 of the crew members come out alive, and her wife is one of them, and she will not talk about what happened down there. She won't even discuss it. She won't even like come close to the subject. And she is just absolutely not the same person that she was before this expedition. And it is the most interesting, like, exploration of grief that I have possibly ever read. Sorry if the camera shakes, it's because you are like balanced on my iPad so I can read some of my notes to remember what I read. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. It was such an interesting progression of discussing grief, of especially the grief of somebody who is still here, like still alive, but just realizing that they are not at all the same person nor the person you fell in love with. So I gave this 4.5 stars. I loved the writing. I, again, would probably read something else by this author. And I really love the ending. I've heard a lot of people who don't like the ending of this. A few people I have seen read it in the last couple of years. And I really like the ending. I like that it was super ambiguous and super creepy and made a statement, for lack of a better term, without giving away any spoilers. But I really enjoyed it and definitely recommend it if you're interested in it, or if you've heard other people talking about it for years like I have and just never picked it up, because that's where I was at. Next up, I read Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy. I think I gave this 4 stars. Yeah, no. I think it's more of a 5 star because this literally has not left my brain since I read it in like one sitting randomly in the middle of the month. And it is about this guy who is on a road trip in the middle of the night. He wasn't supposed to leave in the middle of the night because he didn't want to drive in the middle of the night. And he was going to meet his like aunt. I think it's his aunt, a family member that he does not get along with because they're like dying and he needs to like go see them. And he like is really down on his luck, not having a good like time in his life and everything. So he's like very much having a lot of self-loathing going on in his brain. But he stops at this rest stop to get like a snack, or he like has to use the restroom, and he stops in there. He goes to the bathroom and he gets locked in, and is throughout the night terrorized by this being and or person and or individuals. Like the first thing that happens, I will wholeheartedly put in here, is that they are like dropping things through the ceiling tiles in the bathroom that he is locked in to terrorize him, like creatures. And the whole explanation of who this bad guy or bad guys is, I really, really liked. I'm a big fan of Nat Cassidy's, and I'm really excited for everything that he puts out, but I really enjoyed this. Like, I can't spoil anything about this because this book is literally like 100 some pages. I think it's like less than 130 pages, and I really, really enjoyed it. I will say that there is some like, how do I say this without spoiling? Like biblical intentions that happen in here, which is another reason why I really, really liked it. And the way it was handled, religious trauma esque is the best way to put it, but I really liked it. I think I'm gonna have to bump it up to 5 stars because it hasn't left my brain since I read it, and it was a short book. The next up I read, And by God's Hand You Shall Die. You'll see in here there's a lot of like religious trauma-esque horrors. So I have a lot of religious horrors I've been keeping track of to make a I can't talk today. A recommendation video for those, hopefully. If you didn't remember, this is the same author as The Har that I read in, was that September? Time is not real at all, especially considering the last 2 weeks. But this is the story about a killer preacher. And it is essentially, so there is this brothel in the current timeline. And the Christians are like trying to get rid of it, as they do, and protesting outside. And this absolutely psychotic, holier than thou preacher gets inside, and through some supernatural means, the city starts to crumble as our characters inside the brothel are like realizing something is wrong with some of their patrons, specifically the men, and that there is something creepy going on in the basement as all of this is happening. And it goes from like slasher horror to like haunted house horror to like haunted town horror, and like how scary this like religious fervor is, and the hatred for those who do not abide by the Bible within this town. And as someone who has a lot of religious trauma, this was very satisfying to see a bunch of the religious people as the bad guys, in my opinion. Oh, I really like this. I gave it 4 stars. It's not quite as good as the horror, but like this subject matter is right up my alley, as you might have guessed from my explanation. And I love David Sodergren's writing style. He has like 7 or 8 books or something like that on Kindle Unlimited, and I'm gonna read all of them. So gave that 4 stars, and moving on. Next up is a book that I have been trying to read for it feels like an eternity, because I have DNF'd it twice, I believe. I tried to read it on audio one year, and then I think I tried to read it on ebook one year, and neither of those worked for me for whatever reason. And I was like, okay, this is third time's the charm, because I found like an arc of it one time during, I don't remember if it was a Little Free Library or if like somebody gave it to me or what it was, but I've had it for a while. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to read this physically, because it told in like an epistolary, like what's the word for that? It has like documents and everything. What's it called? Mixed media format. And that is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This was the darling of BookTube for a very long time, especially when I first started BookTube, which I realize a lot of you weren't around during that time. Or at least I don't think so, because I've been doing this for like 8+ years. And everybody and their mother loved this, and I was so annoyed that I couldn't ever like get into it, because I've always wanted to read it. It sounds right up my alley. It's horror, it's mixed media. I love both of those things. And it's about this like cult filmmaker. And again, all 3 things that I adore and should like. And I eventually just had to sit my butt down like the week before Halloween and read this whole thing in like 2 days. Like, I was up late into the night reading it. I don't do that, especially not with physical books anymore, because once I got like 100 pages into it, I was hooked. And that was like as far as I had ever gotten. So apparently the first 100 pages are just really slow for my brain. I was absolutely hooked on this. I highly recommend it, even though it took me a million years to actually finally get into it. This is about this cult filmmaker and the journalist who was disgraced the last time he tried to look into this cult filmmaker, because this man's people came after him and like discredited him, and his life was ruined. Like, I think it ended his marriage and everything, and it was a whole big scandal. And now that this cult filmmaker's daughter has committed, I don't know if I can say this on YouTube, I'm not monetized, has committed suicide, he is looking back into the case that ruined his life, because he thinks there is something else going on there. I will preface this by saying I gave this 5 stars. I am just as shocked as everyone else for the amount of times that I've tried to read this book. I don't know if it was just a wrong time for my brain to try to read it or what, but it worked this time. And my favorite part, I'm not even in frame, hold on. My favorite part about this book was the ending. The whole like last 200 pages is when they were searching his mansion for clues, was the best part of the book. He like ends up recruiting 2 people that like are also very hooked on this case, and there's a whole little thing going on there with these 3 and their weird little dynamic of like sleuthing, trying to look into Cordova. Cordova is the cult filmmaker who makes these like horror, almost snuff films that have this like mass following on the internet, but because they are so depraved and messed up, they like, a lot of the information isn't for the public eye. They're on like a secret forum. You have to have like a password to get on. And it was really interesting. I liked all of the like newspaper clippings and like the snippets of the online forum once they crack the code to get into it and see what all of Cordova's like followers are saying. I love the idea. Again, this is going to be in my cult video, because that I keep saying I'm going to make, but I don't have quite enough books to throw on there yet, because I like to get like 7 to 10 recommendations to make those types of videos, if you didn't know. And I'm right at about that for the cult videos, so that might be coming before the end of the year, if I can muster up the energy to film at a decent pace. Yes, I adored this. I liked that you couldn't tell who was lying, who was telling the truth, what was real, what wasn't real, whether something was drug induced or if this reporter was just paranoid. Like, it was a great time, in my opinion, and I really, really enjoyed it. I think Marisha Pestle came out with another book after this one, and people didn't like that one as much, but I think I might still look into it because I love this so much. And then I read another book that I really, 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 really loved and is even going to be even more relevant in the coming years with the economy that we're likely to see under Project 2025, as all of that horror happens. I'm trying so hard not to go on a rant about that because I feel like I haven't said anything that hasn't already been said by a lot of people on the internet, but maybe I'm wrong and a lot of people haven't heard certain sides of it. So I might make a video about it later when I've collected my thoughts and rage. But I read a book called The Store by Bentley Little, and this is just 100% a commentary on monopolies, specifically in businesses. And it is an Amazon, Walmart-esque store, literally just called The Store, and people are like, oh, that's a dumb name, but it becomes such a huge monopoly, and there's something super sketchy going on behind the scenes of how it is taking over entire towns. But it also, like, they won't do anything that is like too competitive with any other huge retailers. Like, they don't mess with Walmart, they don't mess with like Costco and stuff like that. But my favorite part about this is that this book was written in 1998, and it literally could not be more relevant now if it tried, which is both horrific in and of itself and also just like baffling, as if Bentley Little has predicted the future, which is exactly how I feel like I'm going to feel about Handmaid's Tale when I finally get around to finishing that book due to the current climate, as I keep saying. But I loved this. It is about this dad who's like, his daughter wants to start working for the store. He's realizing that it's like knocking a bunch of other small businesses out of business, because not only because they are able to take the losses and everything, because it's such a huge conglomerate of a store that it doesn't have to worry about prices. Like, he can slash prices and put everybody else out of business without losing any money themselves, which, as we know, is a big issue with huge monopolies of companies in general. But also, there is definitely a sort of supernatural weird element going on throughout the story, and you can't tell if it's a real supernatural phenomenon, and or if it's just our main character, who is like the dad of these girls who went to work at the store, being paranoid. Although it's very likely that he's not being paranoid based on certain things. But I love this. I still think about it. I've brought this up in conversation with other people in the last couple of weeks, especially since the election, because this is just going to get worse. Monopolies and like the rich billionaires are just going to get richer and richer and richer and richer under a lot of these things, and things that that man is putting into place or plans to put into place. And it was a fascinating look at monopolies with a fun little like horror, like supernatural twist. And it has started my idea for forming a series called Capitalism Horror, which is another list I'm compiling for recommendations, because I have a couple of ones that are somewhat similar to this. So really enjoyed that one. And the last 7 books were I filmed in my last video that went up, and that is reading Halloween smut. And I read all 7 of those books. I read Bad to the Bone by Salem Sinclair. I read Jack by Layla Faye. I read Halloween Mating by Kyra Keys. Halloween by Holly Wild. Crow by Layla Faye. Jack's Head by Siggy Shade, and Carving for Kara. If you want to know my opinions on those, you can go watch my last video. That's all I'm going to say about those. My favorite was Bad to the Bone, and I plan on reading other things by Salem Sinclair, and that's all I have to say about those. But those are all 21 books I read in the month of October. If you are as horrified by the election results as I am, please put a string of blue hearts in the comments down below. If you want to complain or talk about your fears with the upcoming current presidency, talk to me in the comments down below. If you voted for that orange man, please leave. This is not the space for you. You're in the wrong side of the internet. That's all I have to say to that. But I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope we're all decompressing in our own little ways. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time. Hopefully soon, if I can get my life together. Hello, me again. And it's literally a month later after I filmed that clip That was like 40 minutes long. My nose is so red. I'm like slightly sick, but I'm on winter break now, so I'm trying to catch up on YouTube. And also still recovering from the horrors of the United States. So I just wanted to throw in my November wrap up because I didn't read practically anything in November due to the horrors. And so I figured I would throw in the 4 books that I finished in that month, mostly in the first week before everything went down, and then 1 after. But yeah, I'm going to throw those in at the end of this video, and that's what's happening. So I read Piper CJ's This Book Sucks. She released this very randomly on Halloween or very close to Halloween. Time doesn't exist anymore, but it was somewhere around there. And this is a short little sapphic vampire novella. I gave it 4 stars. I really like it. I really like Piper CJ's books. If you've been around here for a little bit, you'll know that I read her The Night in Its Moon series earlier this year and loved it, and it's going to be on my favorite books of the year. So, and then I read Teleportasm by Joshua Milliken. And this was a short little horror book. It was one of the horror ones I did not quite get to before Halloween. And this was literally about a haunted VHS tape, which any of us millennials that grew up on The Ring has always been my favorite, or one of my favorite scary movies. So I really enjoyed this. I also gave it 4 stars. I thought it got a little bit convoluted towards the end because it didn't quite know how to wrap it up, but I thought it was fun. Then I read Corrupted Vessels by Briar Ripley Page. This is a queer author that I've been meaning to look into. This was the first hold I got of theirs that came in through my library. And this is going to be in my cult recommendations video, upcoming, hopefully soon if I can get my shit together and film for YouTube, which I absolutely have not been doing, but I'm hoping to catch up with, as all the fun videos are supposed to come out, like favorites of the year and such, before our lives implode next month and into next year. But yes, I read Corrupted Vessels. This is literally a story about somebody who gets wrapped into not necessarily your traditional cult in the sense of like a lot of people following someone and being bamboozled into believing things. It was more just one person who gets wrapped up in this like little mini cult that starts out religious and then turns non-religious. And then the last book that I read in November, which is the only thing I had read up until like 2 weeks ago, which I am filming this on December 19th as a heads up. It's been a month since I filmed that last clip, but the only book I had read, and I think it was in the last couple of days of November when I had read it, is Democracy in Retrograde, which, judging by the title, you might be able to understand for obvious reasons why I might have read this. And it's because it is by somebody I've followed for years, at least since the pandemic, on Instagram. Her name is Emily. Her like screen name is Emily in Your Phone. And her friend wrote this book back in 2020, 2021, and somewhere around there. And it's about all of the reasons our democracy is broken and how we might be able to fix it. I did like that they had like little question and answer things at the end of each chapter, which wasn't super helpful because I listened to this on audio and I was not following along in that way. But yeah, this kickstarted the only things that I've really been reading for the last month that you'll hopefully hear about in a December wrap up. I can't even talk today. In a December wrap up that I will hopefully get to film soon. But yeah, I have mostly been reading like feminist rage nonfiction, and reasons our government and people in this current state of our country of the United States are all kinds of issues that are coming up that are weird. I am personally taking a closer look at. So yeah, gave this 4.5 stars. Really enjoyed it. And that wraps up my November. That is the least amount of books that I have read this entire year. So there's that. But yeah, trying to get back into reading. It's mostly been nonfiction audiobooks. So if you're not into those, you might not love the December wrap up, but that's going to be the majority of it. I think I finished a fiction book that I had started right before Election Day and then didn't read for a month because it was too real, even though it's a dystopian. So I'll talk about that one. And then I just started reading my second fiction book like 2 days ago. So we're trying to get back into the fiction, but it's mostly been nonfiction. But yeah, thought I would jump on here and throw in the last couple books onto the end of this video because it's definitely not enough to be its own video, but I'm going to try to film a reading vlog because that is way easier for me to conceptualize with my fried brain at the end of teaching children before the holidays and my 13-day break that I'm about to embark on. So I hope you all enjoyed this, or at least have stuck around to see what's going on, even though I haven't been here in like a month and a half. But thank you all for watching. I will hopefully see you in another video very soon. And I just messed up my own outro. I'll see all of you guys next time. Bye.